Welcome back to Golden Grade Podcast. Today we're going to talk about hardware and software and the stuff you need to be a photographer or a videographer. Hey guys, I'm Joe.
And I'm Michael.
And we're going to talk about CPUs, RAM, hardware, all this stuff, but we're going to make it very easy and very simplistic, kind of dumb it down, just kind of the things you need to be able to improve your workflow or even get started on your workflow.
Yeah, I think a lot of photographers, videographers, they don't really know that much about computers and can be really daunting. And I think we are both pretty computer nerds, but you don't have to be. And so today we're going to just make it really simple to understand the gear that you really need to know to do some powerful editing.
Very easy.
Incredibly easy. So, you know what? Then we're going to get into the software, which is the actual interesting part that I think a lot of people care about. The programs that you need to use, some paid versions, some free versions, some things that we like. But yeah, let's talk really quickly about hardware. We're going to make this so quick. Do you want to kick it off with what a CPU is?
So a CPU, in layman's terms, is the brain of your computer. Yep. It handles a lot of computing tasks. So your CPU is generally Intel or AMD, or if you're running Apple, it's an M1 or a I think they use Intel.
They used to use Intel, sir.
Yeah, and that is your general purpose multitasking kind of.
Yeah, so you need a powerful CPU to do a lot of really hard Photoshop stuff if you're going to be doing photo editing. Your CPU is going to be useful for running really complicated tasks. And really powerful programs. So if your computer that you're using, or your phone, doesn't have a super powerful CPU, you're going to run into some trouble. I would recommend doing some research on your own to find out what some of the good recommended CPUs are for photo editing. But when you're looking for a computer, make sure you get a CPU that's decently powerful.
Yeah.
Not a really old computer, not a very low-end CPU. Generally, we're talking about 8 cores. If you don't know what that means, that's
8
okay.
8 cores is pretty standard when it comes to at least video editing.
Yeah, but if you see a computer that has like a Core 2 Duo or something like that, if you see a very low core count, if you see a very low clock speed, you might need to avoid that CPU.
Yeah. Intel does a pretty good job at almost everything they have is either quad core or
these days.
Also, we're not going to get into it, but Intel also has efficiency cores, which handles. So your main primary performance cores are how many cores your system has, and the efficiency cores will make that workflow easier on the primary cores.
Yeah, so some of the new Intel chips are insanely powerful.
Yeah. Meteor Lake, I think it is now.
Yes.
Alder Lake. I had Alder Lake. That's 12. So 13th is... Okay.
Yeah, regardless. That's getting too lost in the weeds. What you need to know is look for a powerful CPU, as powerful as you can get while being reasonable. If it has, at least 8 cores or 8 threads, you're good to go. It has a pretty decent clock speed, as close to 4.2 megahertz as you can get, basically.
Yeah.
At the higher clock speed, that's what you want to look for.
If you have an i5, at least Intel i5, that's a solid starting point.
Yeah, and a lot of the new AMD Ryzen chips are really good mid-range chips, and the Threadrippers are obviously amazing, but they're very expensive. But those AMD chips are good as well. And if you're getting a Mac, I can't recommend anything that's not an M1 at this point. The M1 chips are so incredible, and we're going to get into that in just a couple seconds. If you're looking at an old MacBook, at least make it a MacBook Pro that has a high-end Intel chip. But I mean, honestly, there's no comparison anymore between those old MacBooks and the new ones. If you can get a Mac that has an M1 or an M2, you're basically gonna be set. There's a lot more we could talk about there, but we're not going to because it doesn't matter. So let's talk about GPUs. What's a GPU?
Your graphics processing unit.
Yeah.
So your graphics card is going to be essential in making sure your picture looks good on your computer, making sure you can decode videos, and your main GPU should be dedicated.
Yeah.
And if you're buying a laptop, it'll say dedicated graphics. If you're buying a PC, it'll say maybe NVIDIA, or it'll say Ryzen.
No. AMD does have some graphics cards, but NVIDIA basically has a hold on the market right now.
Or the Intel Arc.
Yeah, there's the new Intel Arc GPUs. They're okay. There's some problems there. I'm really looking forward to the next gen Intel GPUs. They should be leaps and bounds better, and I have a lot of faith in Intel there. But yeah, I mean, long story short, there are a lot of graphics cards out there. There are a lot of mid-range ones. There's so many resources on the internet that my main takeaway, you need a graphics card for video editing.
Yeah.
All computers have internal graphics. If you see something that says AMD or Intel integrated graphics, it's not going to, you can't do it. You cannot use integrated graphics. That is enough graphics to run your screen, maybe pull up a 1080p YouTube video. You will not be able to video edit it. You will not be able to do hardcore photo editing. You won't be able to do any sort of deep processing.
Well, let's say you can, but it's just going to be ridiculously slow, or it's going to be, it's going to stifle.
I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's gonna hold you back.
Yeah, it's gonna be massive. If you're trying to do, like, you can't edit 4K video without a.
You can. Again, it'll just take.
It will. No,
with proxy clips, you can.
I think it's impossible to edit a 4K high bitrate video.
Oh yeah, it'll take forever.
It could take.
And that's if it doesn't crash.
I don't think it. I think your programs would crash. I think they would crash before. Some programs don't actually even let you start rendering certain things without a dedicated GPU.
Yeah.
Now, the one caveat we're going to talk about here is something called an SoC, which very simply means system on chip. The Apple M1 chip is a graphics card and a CPU in one.
Yeah.
Both it has both inside of it, and it's amazing at what it does. The M1 chips are not the most efficient technically, but for creatives, I think most creatives who are not trying to get maximum frame rates in a video game or whatever, most creatives at this point, the M1 chip, M2 chip, they're great. They're super good. They have a GPU and a CPU in them. So with an Apple, obviously those laptops and the new computers don't have a dedicated GPU anymore, and that's totally okay. But there is an AMD equivalent, but we don't need to get into that. But yeah, you can do it without a GPU if it's an Apple M1 or an AMD APU technically. But as a rule of thumb, especially if you're buying a big computer or a Windows laptop, you need a dedicated graphics card, and that's all I have to say about that.
All right, so that's then we got what else? Your RAM.
Yeah, RAM.
Your multitasking.
Yeah, so
sticks.
Exactly. Your little fellows that help you out on the back end. Can you explain RAM real quick?
Yeah. So to go through RAM, there's either at this point in the world, there's DDR4 or DDR5. DDR5 is generally faster and more expensive. It is coming down now.
Yeah, that's true.
And DDR4 is cheaper and slower. Generally, a laptop will have DDR4. I don't know if they make DDR5 laptops yet.
I think
I might be wrong. I don't know. But if you have your own desktop, it's probably DDR4, unless it's brand new. A super high-end pre-built.
Yeah.
Just bare bones. The more RAM you have, the faster your multitasking can be.
Exactly.
And you might be able to open 6 Chrome tabs.
6 whole Chrome tabs. This is incredible.
Chrome sucks RAM. That's just, by the way.
That's true. As a general rule of thumb, if you don't know what to look for, that's fine. Look for, like we said, at least DDR4 RAM at this point, and a minimum of 8 gigabytes for most creative software at this point. With the kind of video technology we have, especially with video.
Yeah.
16 gigabytes is not too hard to come by. It's pretty easy. It's not prohibitively expensive, and it's highly preferred over 8 gigabytes.
Yeah.
So if you can't get 16 gigabytes of RAM, my laptop has 32 gigabytes of RAM in it and a dedicated graphics card, so it's attainable. You can get a laptop that does both. It's a lot easier to build out a PC, like a tower, that does that. But
yeah. So I'm gonna give you a few specs. If you go by these specs and try to stay as close to this as you can, then this is a good guide for either buying a laptop or a desktop. If you can get an i5 Intel with 16 or 32 gigs of RAM and a dedicated 3060 or a 2070. Those
2070 graphics card.
Graphics card. If you take this clip and bring it to a Best Buy, they will help you.
Yeah, that is a great sort of mid to high range laptop build. That is gonna be perfectly fine. You have a similar build?
No.
Your laptop, yeah.
My laptop's an i7 with a 38.
Okay, well, it's slightly better, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean...
But it's closer.
Yeah, I have a 2070 graphics card, an NVIDIA 2070 graphics card, and I have an i7, and I have, like I said, 32 gigabytes of RAM, which I upgraded from 16. And yeah, I mean, that is a great range for high-end production. And again, if you want to be in the Mac ecosystem, that's great. Just make sure you're getting an M1 chip, please. Please make sure you're getting an M1 chip, and if you can, get a model that has 16 gigabytes.
And if you can, get Windows.
I'm not going to say that because that is a hot take, and a lot of creatives prefer that Mac. There's a lot of benefits to the Mac ecosystem. I am a Windows person myself. I've always used Windows, and I like it better.
I was actually a Mac person.
Yeah, that's true.
For many years.
That's true.
And then I built a PC, and I'm like, ooh.
Yeah,
Ooh, piece of candy.
there's some benefits, but we can get back into that debate
Yeah.
at another time. The main point of this episode we want to talk about is editing. How do you actually edit your stuff?
What software you
What
need?
software do you need? And we mentioned the hardware because you can't run a lot of this software well if you don't have the right hardware. So if you just have an old laptop that you used for college 3 years ago or whatever, or a Chromebook, sorry, you are going to need a better laptop. And that is going to be a huge investment into your future, I promise you, outside of content creation, even though that's not your job. So I definitely recommend that. So, what do you need? What kind of software do we have?
So I'm just going to list off some of the paid softwares, and then we'll dive down deep a little bit into them. So for paid software, we're going to talk about is basically the Adobe Creative Suite.
Yeah,
it's
the Creative Cloud.
Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator, Premiere, and After Effects.
Yep.
These are the paid per month is subscription. I think it's like $80 a month if you want the full suite. But personally, I use a free program for my video, and I do use Adobe for my photos.
Yep.
So it only costs me $10 a month, and I can do all my photo editing with Adobe.
Yeah.
But so Photoshop. So do you want to kind of tell us briefly what Photoshop is?
Photoshop is the industry standard for photo manipulation and graphic creation, essentially. It is a raster-based program, so that means that you're manipulating individual pixels. If you don't know what that means, that's okay, but it is the industry standard. Everybody in the
Uses
design world
Photoshop.
uses Photoshop to some extent. There's just no... There's no way around it. If you're going to get a professional job, you're going to be using Photoshop. Freelancers will use it. There are other options, which we're going to talk about.
There are free options. I will say, as far as video editors, there's always different options. When it comes to photo editors, I haven't found
Yeah.
anything that matches Photoshop.
There isn't anything that really. There are some free options,
Yeah.
and there's some paid options that are close, but Photoshop is an essential, and it might be the only Adobe product that you use.
And that's fine.
Yeah, but and it's a lot cheaper that way. And we're going to talk about free stuff because what we're going to realize is the Adobe Creative Suite is paid monthly, like you said. And if you buy all the stuff, it can be prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
Incredibly expensive. Adobe is not a great company, honestly. They are and they aren't. They make amazing products, but they also have some sort of anti-consumer sort of practices. We'll say.
So does Apple.
Oh yeah,
the
for
right
sure.
to repair.
Oh, for sure, yeah. But Adobe is kind of like the Apple of the creative world.
Yeah.
I mean, they've highly monopolized.
Everyone has it. Everyone needs it.
They've
but
monopolized the market, and they try to basically get you indoctrinated into their software. So that's why they give college students free subscriptions. It can be really expensive, and especially because it's monthly. If you're paying $80 a month, that's an expensive phone plan. So
Yeah.
That's a whole other bill. Whereas a lot of the other softwares are either free
I think we should
or
have
one-time
a
purchase.
whole episode just on Adobe.
Yeah, totally. We can get into that later.
So let's go into Lightroom though.
Lightroom is super essential. Explain Lightroom, Jay.
Lightroom is your base photo editor. If you capture raw photos,
or even not raw.
yeah, raw or JPEGs, whatever you're capturing.
Yeah.
Lightroom is the way to get your photos edited quick. You
Yeah.
can save presets to make them all have the certain style. Obviously, you have to make literal adjustments here and there because each photo's exposure can be different, especially the direction you're facing, where the sun is, where the light is. But Lightroom in general is your general purpose editor. It controls exposure, contrast, sharpening, noise reduction. If you can get one program on this list for photography, I wouldn't even recommend Photoshop.
Yeah,
I would recommend
agreed.
Lightroom.
Agreed.
If you're shooting weddings, if you're shooting engagement photos, you want Lightroom more than Photoshop. Photoshop can do
Absolutely.
everything that Lightroom does, but take 3 times longer. But you can't do everything that Photoshop can do in Lightroom.
That's true.
There's photo manipulation, warping, composites, all those things nearly impossible in Lightroom.
Yeah.
So having those in combination with each other is fantastic. You can get a package on Adobe, which I will say this is a fair deal. It is $10 for Photoshop and Lightroom every month.
That's perfectly fine.
I think that's fine.
That's a pretty low expense, I think, for most
Low
creators.
entry.
Yeah. If you start doing a whole bunch of content creation with video editing, and if you need motion graphics and you're creating all that sort of stuff, that's when Creative Cloud can get expensive, especially if you're getting like fonts and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree that Photoshop and Lightroom is one-two knockout like combo.
Yeah.
That you really are going to be struggling to get around it. Now there are alternatives, and I've used quite a few alternatives to Lightroom actually, and I don't think you have, so I might have more to say on that. But yeah. If you're doing photos, especially if you're shooting in RAW, but because raw photos always need touched up 100% of the time. But even if you're not, if you want to get a more interesting style than just straight off the camera, which most photographers do, I would argue all do, you need a photo editor, and Lightroom is the photo editor. All
Yeah.
right.
So let's talk a little about Premiere and Final Cut. I know nothing about Final Cut, so I'll let you talk about Final Cut.
I mean, I don't have a ton to say about Final Cut. Well, let's talk about Premiere first.
Let me just cover a little thing on Premiere. Premiere is essentially the tier 1 video editor. Everyone in the industry uses it.
Yep.
And funny story, a lot of people will actually use I can't speak. Premiere to edit their videos and then use DaVinci to color grade.
This is true.
You taught me that, and I also, a lot of people online, I was watching some videos.
We'll save DaVinci for the end of this, because DaVinci, guys, is the killer app here. But yeah,
we have a whole episode dedicated how to color.
With
color grading in DaVinci while using like Lightroom.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a little more technical maybe on season 2, but Premiere, my problem with Premiere was, and let me tell you a little story.
All right, tell me a story.
So Premiere is manipulative. I bought Premiere. It was $20 a month, and I was like, all right, $20 a month. I stopped using it because I didn't like it, and I switched to DaVinci, and they charged me $60 to cancel it.
Really? I didn't know that.
On top of that, when I opened Premiere, there was a bunch of little pop-up screens, and they suckered me into getting Adobe stock. So they were taking $30 out of my account every single month for nearly 3 or 4 months. So I lost $200 to Adobe. I called Adobe and said, hey, if you look at my history, I haven't downloaded a single thing from the stock. I didn't even know I was paying for it.
Yeah.
They told me to go F myself.
And knowing Adobe, there's no way they would give you that money back. Adobe has terrible customer service.
I was like, listen, I don't even want the money back. If you want to put it into the subscriptions that I have and just kind of use it as a credit, that's fine. Because I will use Photoshop till the day I die. But I have such a gripe with Premiere now. And
I mean, Premiere is an industry standard for sure. It has a lot of features that are really powerful. It's a good editor. You can do a lot of great work with it. A lot of people prefer Premiere. I used it for about 1.5 years. I hate it, man. I can't go back. I use DaVinci Resolve now, which we're going to talk about. But Premiere is an industry staple, but it crashed all the time on me for seemingly no reason. Lots of crashes. The interface feels a little old, honestly. It definitely feels like it's 6 or 7 years old now. There's a lot of unintuitive stuff. I hate the audio tab. There's problems with Premiere. I don't personally recommend it, especially because DaVinci Resolve exists.
And it's free.
And it's free, guys. And we'll talk about DaVinci in a second.
DaVinci sponsor us.
Now, After Effects, which you mentioned, is Adobe's motion graphics creator. And this is another industry standard app for cinematographers. This is used in Hollywood. This is used in for almost all motion graphics artists use this. If you want to make motion graphics, even if you want to do animations, it's really hard to do it without After Effects.
Yeah.
There are other programs for different, like 3D animations, that's a different thing. But for what After Effects is for compositing, there's no real equivalent, and it is an insanely complicated program. It is, you can get into the wormhole. It is, you can dive deep into it. But I don't like After Effects all that much. And Resolve has a built-in version, a built-in rival to it, we'll say. That's not as good, but it does exist. After Effects is another thing. If you really want to do motion graphics, you need After Effects. But After Effects is, if you don't have it, like we were saying earlier, if you don't have a GPU, don't even think about downloading After Effects.
That's fair.
All right,
so the last one on the Adobe suite. Let's.
My child.
He loves Illustrator, so I will let him rant for the next 2 minutes.
I'm not going to rant for 2 minutes, but Adobe Illustrator is the logo creator. If you need to create a logo, use Illustrator. There's no comparison. Illustrator is my favorite Adobe program. I get the least crashes with it. In fact, I get no crashes. It's very intuitive, in my opinion, much more intuitive than a lot of the other ones. Photoshop's the only other really intuitive one, I think.
I love Photoshop.
I mean, Lightroom's great too, but Adobe Illustrator is really powerful.
To be fair, none of these Adobe products are optimized well for computers.
That's true.
They do not. I don't think they do a very good job at optimizing, but some of these products, they just work well.
Yeah, that's true.
And
As
there's-
much as I hate and loathe Adobe, they make some really good programs.
And the problem is, like, if you want a tutorial and you want to go on YouTube and look at a tutorial, 90% of the time it's Premiere or Lightroom.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
I mean, Premiere or Photoshop.
yeah,
it's
gonna be
always
an Adobe product.
yeah, it's
very
a
likely.
general.
Adobe Lightroom, or excuse me, Illustrator is my favorite app. I love logo creation. I love that design, and I like vector. It's just I prefer to work with vectors instead of raster. Let's quickly talk about Final Cut real quick. So Final Cut is the Apple answer to Premiere.
Yep.
A lot of people.
So is
I know-
iMovie.
Okay, iMovie. Don't use iMovie. Hey guys, don't use iMovie. Final Cut Pro, I believe, is a one-time $300 purchase. At least last I checked. But it's not a subscription. And
Which is nice.
I know a lot of people who have switched from Premiere to Final Cut. Very respected people that chose to use Final Cut. It crashes less. It is much more intuitive, which, from my understanding, I've never used it.
It's like a super advanced iMovie.
It is like
That's all it
iMovie,
is.
roided up, hit the gym for a year, came back, went to college.
It's
and
a bro.
Final Cut is a very good program. I know a lot of people like
It's an
it.
eyebrow.
Eyebrow, yeah, I guess so. So yeah, those are the industry
Paid.
standard killer apps. Those are the paid ones, but a lot of people aren't gonna have money when you're getting into this. And there are a lot of and some notable examples of some really good free software. So let's just really quickly.
We're just gonna we told you about the Adobe version of it, and then we're gonna tell you the free version and maybe one thing that's like a little worse.
Do you mind if I start out with Photoshop real quick?
Go for it.
Because I have a note on it. There are two huge recommendations for Photoshop alternatives. They are GIMP and Paint.net. I am here to tell you that Paint.net is terrible, having used it primarily for all of my life. I used Paint.net for the majority of my life. GIMP is also not great. I haven't used either of these programs yet.
I've used GIMP once, and I think I bought Photoshop.
GIMP is outdated and open source and has a lot of problems. Same with Photoshop. There are other like sort of more meant for painting, like Fire Alpaca and Medibang and like programs like that. These are free programs that are really meant more for painting. A lot of people will be like, oh, you can use this. You really can't. It doesn't. These photo manipulation tools are not up to snuff. Paint.net can do some things. GIMP can do some things. It's night and day to a completely different degree.
Yeah.
Now, there is one program that you and I both came across. I think you recommended that I check it out.
Inkscape, right?
No. We were talking about photo editing. So,
Affinity.
Affinity.
Yeah.
Affinity is a photo editor that is paid. It's a one-time payment.
It's like $60.
It's yeah. So it's about
It's
like,
dirt cheap compared
it's
to
a
Photoshop.
couple months of Photoshop paid one time, and honestly,
It's really good.
It's really good.
For a $60 software that
Yeah.
you like own. It's
Yeah.
really good.
It's called Affinity Photo. It has so much more of the things that you need: the advanced manipulation tools,
Yeah.
warping tools, layering tools, compositing tools. There's a lot more color manipulation than in GIMP and Paint.net. It's much more intuitive. It's very much a copy of Photoshop. There's a couple things that I don't think it has, like Content Aware is a huge AI powered.
well, that's a new thing on Photoshop too. That's not.
Photoshop has some smart selection tools that are amazing.
Yeah.
I don't think Affinity has, but overall, you can get
You can get the bare bones out of Infinity.
Yeah, I think
and
there
a
is
little bit
clone
more
stamp.
than the bare bones.
I think there's a clone stamp sort of equivalent
Yeah.
as well. So there's some really powerful tools in Photoshop that you just can't get anywhere else. Although Affinity is the thing that I think comes closest.
If you had to choose something other than Photoshop, I would choose Affinity. Again,
Yeah.
it's also a paid software,
But
it's
long
a
run,
cheaper paid software.
within a year, it will have doubled. It will have doubled over and paid itself twice.
The thing I like about Affinity the most is you can open Photoshop documents in it,
This is true. Yeah,
but you can't open Affinity documents in Photoshop.
that's true as well.
So if you have, if you're looking for tutorials online, someone dropped their Photoshop document, you can open it in Affinity, which is, I think, very good teaching tool at least.
Yeah, it is. It is very. It is very good. And I think that if you're gonna get serious about photo editing more than just like color correction and stuff, you really should try to get something at least
Yeah.
like an Affinity, because you can't do the same thing with like a Paint.net and GIMP, which
Yeah.
are the two most common recommendations I see.
Inkscape.
Inkscape, yeah.
Inkscape is Illustrator with slightly less features, but is free. So I would recommend it 100%. And that's all we really need to say about it. It's a vector-based program that makes it makes Adobe look bad for it really does, because it can do everything that Illustrator does. Maybe there's a few little things here and there, but you can learn how to do those things on Inkscape, and you're not paying a single dime. That's why Inkscape is so good, because there's so many tutorials, because it's so good and people use it.
You can do basically everything you can do in Illustrator with Inkscape for free. There's some clunkiness to it. There's a little bit of weirdness to it. But Illustrator has obviously been around longer, so it's a little cleaner. But yeah, I totally agree. And I'm saying that as Illustrator is one of my favorite programs ever. Inkscape is awesome. Lightroom equivalents. Lightroom is probably, if you're a photographer, Lightroom's probably the most important app, I think, right?
Lightroom? Yeah, I would agree.
There are no immediate like Lightroom Classic equivalents, but I have used one called Photo Director. I used Power Director, which is another paid video app. It's not a good program, really. It's outdated. But Photo Director is a Lightroom Classic equivalent. I've used it. It has all the features you need, every single one of them. It has great organization features, which is one a lot of photo editors lack organization features. Which, when you're taking 1,000 wedding photos, you need that. It has all the flagging, the star rating that you need. It has every color correction thing. It has the sort of like masking tools as well. Photo Director is basically Lightroom Classic. And I like it. It's great.
That's good. I didn't even know it existed.
It's a one-time payment. There are a few equivalents that are free, but they're really lacking in features. The basic color correction. If you can't pay for something, you need to find something. There are a few.
So I would just recommend that this is a hot take, but if you're going to spend money on anything, spend your money on Photoshop and Lightroom.
I agree. But there are some people who are going to say no, they don't want to support Adobe, which is fine.
Well, that's you, who also supports Adobe.
Yeah, I do support Adobe, and I wish that there were. I wish they had more competition, because competition breeds innovation, and they don't currently have a lot of competition. So it's just a whole bunch of lower quality clones, basically.
So now we're going to talk about Video Editor.
All right.
I think we should just glance over this, because we talked about DaVinci 3 different times within.
Yeah, I know.
Premiere.
Oh yeah.
So DaVinci is a free editor. It has some of the best color grading in all of. Video.
Real quick, the history of DaVinci is that it started out not before it was DaVinci Resolve. It was just DaVinci, and it was a dedicated color grading software for Hollywood. You had to buy your own computer. It cost like millions of dollars, and a studio would buy this huge hardware and color grade with it, and it was the industry standard for Hollywood color grading. Then it got made cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and eventually Blackmagic Design acquired and decided to make it free. Now, DaVinci Resolve is a free program that has all of the most powerful color grading tools that have been used in Hollywood for the past 30 years, and it's free, guys. And they're amazing. It's amazing.
It's free to an extent. There's also you're limited on your free version. They have a $300 upcharge for Studio or Pro.
Same as Final Cut, basically.
Yeah, and it has a few more features like denoising, but if you're doing basic video editing, YouTube, all that stuff, you're fine.
Advanced editing. You can do a lot with the free version.
Yeah, you could do pretty advanced stuff. You could use Fusion for making motion graphics. You can use pretty much almost all the FX and overlays. It's just a few things that are locked behind a paywall. Like denoising video, but if you take good video, you really don't need denoise that much.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and like I said earlier, I use Premiere, one of the industry standards for years, and I switched to Resolve, and I've never looked back. The editing workflow is amazing. The audio tab is a dream come true for an audio engineer like me. It's not the greatest DAW ever, but it's really good. We're recording into it literally as we speak.
Also, Premiere cannot handle B-Raw nearly as well as DaVinci.
Yeah, DaVinci Resolve is meant for that.
So I mean, that take of that what you will. But if you have a Blackmagic, your chances are you're already editing on DaVinci. But it just works more seamless. It's kind of like Apple and their ecosystem. Like once you're in, it makes everything just a tad bit easier.
So that's DaVinci Resolve. It's super duper important. It is my personal recommendation for all video editors. It's amazing. All right, tell us about a couple other alternatives for different purposes.
So I'm gonna run through this real quick, but CapCut is basically a 9:16 aspect ratio video editor. It essentially came about because of TikTok, but it has a few pretty good editing features for free software, at least on the fly, whatnot. Auto captions is literally a lifesaver. I use that almost religiously on every single TikTok we make.
Yeah.
And it's just really good for getting those trending audio clips because it has it built into CapCut, those audio cues. Okay, so Media Human. Media Human is a free YouTube to MP3 downloader. I would never recommend pirating or using other people's works, but there's a lot of non-copyright things on YouTube that you can download.
Creative Commons and
Yeah,
stuff.
and it's just a pain to go through the whole online download. Sometimes they want your email and all that. If you download the program, it's a program. It's on your desktop. You can just pull it up, paste your YouTube link, and download. It's honestly the easiest thing I've ever found to download MP3s.
Yeah, super useful. All right, so that's all of our software stuff.
That's more software. We're going to go deep into individual programs in later episodes.
Yeah, but that's a quick run over.
Yeah, quick once over. Oh, quick. Yeah.
Quick little glance.
So also, I want to say thank you to Fiverr. We have an affiliate link now. So if you guys want to support us, Fiverr is, say you like taking pictures, you like filming video, but you're not too keen on the editing aspect. Fiverr's there. They got hundreds of people who are willing to edit, sometimes cheaper, sometimes more expensive. Life, just like life, it's what you get and what you pay for. But they do great work. I've used them before on intros for other podcasts. Fiverr, they really do come through.
Yeah, for sure. If you really need some freelance work done and you just don't have the capacity, I highly recommend Fiverr. It's basically the only service that does what it does.
Yeah.
The way that they do it. It's
And
super
the
useful.
cool thing about Fiverr is, like, say you love all this filmmaking, video, obviously you're here, but say you love all this and there's one aspect like thumbnails that you just hate. Like, we hate thumbnails.
Yeah.
But say that's one aspect you don't like,
Wholeheartedly, yeah.
outsource it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Fiverr,
alright.
great service. Thank you, Fiverr.
So we're going to get into questions.
Yep.
And you're going to ask me questions this week, apparently.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you some questions. So I picked the questions this week. I only have a few.
Get me all tingly.
Yeah, so this one's from r/megacanon88 on Reddit. It says, what are the basic photo editing techniques every photographer needs to know? So this is basic stuff. We're not talking about like compositing. We're talking about the basics.
The basics.
This is stuff that I see people screw up all the time, and it's hard to look at.
I would say shoot darker more than lighter. It's easier to bring those shadows back than it is to recover those highlights.
That's true.
When you're editing a raw photo, a lot of it is playing around with exposure. Just like we talked about Lightroom. If you can get an exposure right, that pretty much is most of your editing.
That's true, yeah.
It's as long as you can get the exposure. Sometimes you want to bump the saturation, pick out some of those colors.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to denoise it a little bit. There's just basic sliders you always want to play with. And once you get through that, you kind of have a rhythm of what you want to like touch upon, and then you can go into the heavy color and all that, pulling out like those oranges and whatnot.
Yeah.
But basic editing techniques, I would say learn your exposure.
Yeah, for sure. My real quick note on that is the main two mistakes I see beginner photo editors make: oversaturation. Saturation seems like an easy way to make it pop.
It should not look like a 2000s Bowling for Soup video. that is not good exposure.
You don't want to do that. So just make sure take it easy on the saturation. I always like to set all of my settings and then bump them back a few notches. Even if I think they look good, I'll bump them back just a little bit because I want to make sure I'm not over editing it. You don't want it to look edited. You want it to look natural. And then also know the color temperature the scene was supposed to be in and try to match it to that. If it looks way colder than it was, and you don't touch that color temperature slider, you're gonna have a bad time. You need to make sure that your
white balance.
Your white balance should be set first. I'll start with your white balance.
Well, most of the time you'll do that on your camera before you even shoot.
That's true, but
white
a lot of people overlook that.
Yeah, some people shoot on auto. I mean, for photo, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
But yeah. So what's the next question?
So the next one is from r/Xims, Xims, I don't know how to say that.
Love.
They say, I love photography, but I hate editing. How can I reconcile this? It seems that editing is a core part of most types of photography. What does one need to do if they love taking photos but hate the editing process?
I would say two options. One, hire on Fiverr using our affiliate link.
Great
two,
recommendation.
the little plug segue. And two, at least for editing, I would say find a preset you like, and at least in Lightroom, if you find a preset you like, press auto. Lightroom does a really good job on auto balancing. Find the preset that you really like. It captures what you had in your head when you were taking the photo, and then edit the preset so it's a little bit either more or less of how like heavy that preset is.
Yeah.
If you don't like the editing process, just preset it and play with it. It'll make your workflow 10 times faster.
Editing is a really powerful way to get where you want to go, but if you hate the process, presets are a really good way to get a lot of the way there. It's not going to be quite your style, but it will really help.
It could be your style.
There's especially if you make a preset that's yours, then that's really your style.
You can make your own preset. You can, some creators sell their own, so if you like an individual creator's preset, most of the time they have a Lightroom pack where you can buy. Again, Adobe has mastered Lightroom.
Yeah, that's true.
They have cornered the market on Lightroom.
Yeah. I would say practice. A lot of the frustrations that I see with beginner photo editors is just because they don't know what they're doing and they're just sitting there fiddling with knobs. The more you practice, the more you learn, research tutorials, it'll become a lot faster. Again, presets are a super great way to kind of cheat the system a little bit.
Speed it up.
Yeah, but just practice, and also keep it simple, stupid. You don't need to do that much. Like you said, if you do the exposure, a little bit of color, you can be done with the photo in 30 seconds if you practice enough, and it's not going to be really edited and really stylized, and it might not be as good as it could be, but you're going to get so much closer.
Yeah, you don't have to go through the whole masking, your subject and everything.
You don't need to be doing crazy editing for every photo. So I think a lot of people who get frustrated with photo editing spend like 10 minutes editing a photo. And unless it's a really, 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 really important photo, I would never spend that much time editing. So
I would recommend capturing in RAW if you hate editing, because
this makes more editing work.
I would say it makes less, because once you auto on RAW, it brings it out better than what it would on a JPEG.
That's true, but although I will say, I do some freelance work, pretty much weekly at this point, on weekends, and I need to deliver photos the instant that I get
shooting weddings
home.
without me.
No, I'm not shooting weddings. No, I'm shooting church services. Specifically, I will shoot in JPEG. I will not shoot in RAW. I will, during the service, while I'm taking different photos, I will go through them, weeding them out, finding the best ones on my camera, and I will get home with no photo editing and no color correction to do. I do not worry about it. I just get my settings as good as I can on the spot, and I upload them straight up, and they look great.
Are you paid for that, or is that just
Yeah, I can get. Sometimes,
okay.
yeah, you can and you can't. It depends on where you go. I volunteer my time. That's
that's what I thought it was. I thought you volunteered.
No, some of the time, I definitely choose to volunteer my time that way. But yeah, all right, give me this. Would you rather? Bro.
Oh, the would you rather for the day. Are you ready?
I'm excited about this. Give me this.
So, would you rather have endless camera memory or endless camera battery?
Oh.
You want to shoot that 8K for the rest of the day, or
what I wouldn't give to have both of these things together? That's tough. You know what I will say is that I find myself changing batteries a lot more than I find myself changing SD cards. Part of the reason is because I choose to shoot in formats that are lighter.
But you wouldn't have to.
Yeah. If I could shoot like infinite storage,
you can shoot 4K 120 forever. Well, until you get like blisters from the camera getting too hot. But
man, I'm gonna have to go with Joe. What are you gonna do?
I'm going battery. I am sick of changing my batteries.
You know,
it is such an aggravate. The fact that we have to, even just this, like the fact that I have to plug in these cameras to get through this podcast is ridiculous.
We don't currently have a camera rig in our arsenal at the moment that has a V-mount battery. If we had a cage with a V-mount battery, I think we'd hate this question a lot less, because then we'd be able to have like our camera run like 5 times longer on one battery.
Well, let's say 5 years in the future, we've made it more as independent artists, whatever. We have an ARRI camera, right? Do you know how fast those things suck through battery?
Yeah, but if we had an ARRI, it would be a totally different game.
Yeah, that's true.
We would have a lot different concerns probably.
Yeah, but money would be less of a concern. If you can afford one of those, the money for the SD cards would be less of a concern than the battery.
Infinite battery.
Infinite battery?
I want infinite battery.
You're on the infinite battery team? Cool. Awesome. So I think that's going to wrap up this podcast.
Right.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Check out Fiverr if you can. Small plug. And Yeah, you got anything else for the viewers?
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, please send them in. We love to
Yeah,
answer your
absolutely.
questions. If you guys have any comments, any advice, feel free to comment wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends about the podcast if you think they'd be interested. Spreading the word really helps. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.